So, okay, you know the routine, feet hip width apart. Weight a little bit forwards, let your hips sink back. Just move a little. So just have a sense of what movement is there for the moment. It's always tempting when you start saying, "Well, I'm going to really go for this," but if you get in your car in the morning, if you've got a car that is, and you start up, you don't put your foot straight down because it's probably going to stall. It takes a few minutes to kind of warm up, and it's the same for us. So with Tai Chi, it's important to give yourself this time to get a sense for what's going on for yourself. To allow for the whole process of mind and body settling in. And just feeling that your sort of movement gradually picks up energy, picks up momentum. If you do want to take a couple of slower, gentle breaths or a couple of deeper breaths, that's fine. But remember, we're not, particularly with this one, we're not held to a breathing pattern. The rhythm of the movement also begins to settle. These are all things that we cultivate by ensuring that our posture is useful, right? And we cultivate these qualities by nurturing the correct environment, mind and body. And then gradually building on that. So with this one, checking that, I'll come a bit closer. It's a slightly odd angle for my legs, I'm afraid, there. But see, there, one of the things I want to avoid is this. If you see my knees twisting from side to side, this is quite a natural thing to happen. But what happens is I turn in one direction, and that pulls in particular the opposite knee. And there'll be a little bit in this knee, but not so much, because there's more of a pressure down through this. And the response to that would be to slowly and carefully rotate your knee back out. So this and this, except they both happen at the same time. So that takes a while to develop. You need to. It's a certain amount of stretching on the inside of the leg and a certain amount of toning for the muscles that rotate the knee out, what they call the abductor muscles. So you basically, with the leg, you've got muscles all around and above and below that allow for sort of this big range of movement. So the muscles that we're looking at the moment are the ones that would move your leg in, what they call the adductor muscles, need to be long enough so that they don't really wrench the knee over, and the abductor muscles on the outer edge of the leg need to just rotate out. So it takes a while to develop that. One of the problems with little details like this is that they can really occupy your attention. When I first started working with this alignment of my knees, I found that for a few days, every time I went outside to practice, all I could think about was my knees. I forgot everything else, literally forgot everything else. It was very annoying. And that passed after a day or two, as I say. And I would come back to it every now and then. And then a year or two later, I was in a hall for a seminar. I was just warming up. There were some mirrors there, and I thought, well, I'll just check, and it was actually getting much better at that point. So when I offer you these sort of details, if it's useful to you, just make a note of it and come back to it. But don't expect to get a positive result straight away. And this is another aspect of this cultivation. You know, if you grow a plant and then you decide, well, I want it to sort of grow more in this direction or whatever, then you would do whatever you needed to help that, but you actually wouldn't expect it to be complete that day or the day after. Another thing we can do in a different direction is to imagine ourselves standing in water up to shoulder height. This is obviously a very common one, and again, this is a process of developing that natural ability, that natural responsiveness between mind and body. And again, that takes time and can be variable with the images. So if, for instance, the image of being in water isn't a helpful one to you, then you could use, if you imagine that you've got sort of elastic bands coming up the side of your body, and then when you turn, they'll stretch out, and you're turning against that pull. But then it pulls you back, and then you start to turn against the pull on the other side. Not straining, not stiffening up, but recognizing the point at which the counter movement overcomes the energy of moving in one direction. That's quite a neat bit of timing. If you think about it, it's probably not going to work. It's like if you're walking along the road with a friend and you know you've got to cross the road, and suddenly your friend crosses the road and you stop and think, should I cross the road? The answer is almost certainly not. You kind of, certain things that you learn to be quite intuitive about. And then raising your arms. So these are all things that we can consider in these opening sections of the session and in the opening of our practice. And they're good things to consider for more than just Tai Chi. They're part of the sort of checking in with yourself and sorting yourself out in the morning. And then just lowering your hands down. Give yourself a few moments in the standing. And you can see yourself reasonably well on the camera. You don't have to see it particularly well, but you may notice here, when I stand, remember our back is longer, broader than the front. So this slight feeling of a concave quality in the ribs will generally mean that your arm hangs straight down. And here, you know, something like my ring finger is pointing down towards my ankle. If I puff my chest out, you see how my hand moves back. If I overdo the withdrawing of the chest, my hand comes forwards here. So this is again a natural position for my arms to rest in. And if they're not there, don't start twisting yourself up. Just bear in mind, you know, the main area of adjustment is going to be here in your pelvis and lower back. So sinking down and pushing up. And again, you can imagine doing this in water. You can imagine, you know, the elastic band. If you're standing on the elastic band and it's attached to, say, your hips, you have to pull up against it and down. Feel the movement through your back and see if you can just place one hand in the small of your back here, just above the pelvis. See if you can feel a little bit of movement there. This, as you sink down and your pelvis tucks under, just that shallowing of the small of your back. And be very careful not to force that, because if you do, then you risk straining in that area. Some years ago, I think possibly the first or second time I met one of my main teachers, a guy called Carell. He was demonstrating the release of power. And he had somebody pressing on his arm. And he picked me out the crowd because he vaguely knew me. Must have been the second time. He said, put your hand on the small of my back and tell people what you can feel. And what happened was, as he went into the posture, the small of his back bulged out and pushed me backwards. It was quite a surprise. I wasn't at all ready for it. And he learned that from a teacher who subsequently had to take some time off because he had back trouble. So whilst it's quite impressive, it's also potentially quite damaging. So be careful with these things. And bring your hands around and then pushing up and sinking down. So these little changes all the way through the body, bigger changes in the legs as the legs get compressed, and those little changes in the structure of the back are all surrounded by muscles and tendons and ligaments, and even the elasticity of other tissue like the fascia. And because those tissues are elastic, then there'll be a kind of, for want of a better term, a natural point where things start to return. So we take that basic rhythm that I mentioned earlier and we just sort of twiddle it, we fine focus it. Again, don't force these things. People sometimes say to me, when do we do the more advanced exercises? And whilst there are more complicated exercises and stronger exercises, it isn't necessarily the case that they're more advanced. That actually a lot of the progression is finding out more about what you think you already know. Sinking down and loading the legs, but your spine will also, and the back will also respond. And when one part of your body is in motion, the whole body is in motion, is engaged with that motion one way or another. Some parts of the body, obviously, particularly the legs, do obviously work harder. Now change into the wild goose. And with the wild goose, you'll probably find as your arms go out that there's a more obvious extension here. There would have been in the previous one, but not quite so clear to you, I think. And remember, every muscle in your body that's concerned with moving something has a complementary opposite. So we're moving between those complementary opposites. Between, if you like, to think of it in Tai Chi terms, between yin and yang. One of the goals is for that movement between the opposite poles to be one of harmony rather than antagonism. And then, excuse me, parting the clouds. So the overall effect is one that is very soothing, which is odd because it's also quite tiring physically in some ways, or at least quite strong, I should say, not necessarily tiring. And it's interesting that people will sometimes observe a class and say that they felt much better for watching it. That's a bit like sitting next to the sea and just hearing the rise and fall of the waves and so on and so forth. These are, in a way, very natural things, I think. Now change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One more on each side. And then as we go into pushing in 4 directions, we get once again the turning movement. So this is a chance to just observe what is going on between your hips and your ankles. And you may well find that this leads you to a point where you're simply not moving as far because you move. If I move too far, then once again my knees start to get twisted up, and beyond a certain point, I can't make the adjustment easily, comfortably. Let's do one more round of these. And then changing. And if it's comfortable, bear in mind what I've just been talking about, and in the turn. So it's not that we don't want to have a goal, or one of the goals has been to increase the range of our movement, but it's about how we do that. Now switching sides. And again, the turn. And row the boat. And then come into the upright position and stand again. So rowing a boat is the first time that we go out of position, if you like. Much of what we do, and certainly much of what is done in Tai Chi Chuan forms, is done in this kind of upright position. But it's not the only thing that we do. If you think of Tai Chi as a martial art, it's actually developed in far from ideal situations, which is, I think, one of its strengths, interestingly. So certain movements do take us out of that, for the best term, natural position. And also certain movements, and we're going to do swimming dragon and bear play, certain movements kind of push at the boundaries of that a little bit. One of the differences being, I mean, bear play, if you think about it, there's almost a sense, you can imagine it working structurally more easily if you're on all fours. Swimming dragon, this is not an everyday position. It's not meant to be an everyday position. So there are some movements in Tai Chi and Qigong that, for a particular reason, would take you out of that to develop a certain aspect. And in both cases, with bear play and swimming dragon, I think one of the key things here is going to be to make sure that the spine itself retains some kind of suppleness, and that we become a little bit aware of that energy in spine, the potential of the spine to feed into the rest of the body. And I think what I was saying earlier about the smaller the back and so on and so forth, some of that has come out of working with exercises like bear play and thinking, oh, actually this can go on, but when we're in a more what we could call everyday stance, when we're in a more practical stance, one that we might use in the supermarket or when we're washing up or something like that, is still useful, because we've got a sense for that movement, and we can still sense it, we can still work with it, even when it's a smaller movement. So let's start with bear play. This way of getting into it, I'm finding this really interesting. This is something that's developing for me. Well, you've seen it developing over the last few weeks. Pushing up from your hips and then down. So what this does is link this very simple exercise, which is ostensibly for the shoulders, with the movement from the rest of the body. No longer just your shoulders and the muscles in that area that are actually part of this movement. The effect on the shoulders is really important, because it means that there's movement there, but the effort of producing that movement, producing that energy, is spread through more of the body. So I rather like this, actually. It's been quite interesting to take this very simple joint rotation and build on it. And then as we come up, we just turn a little bit, and that moves our weight. So we now take that movement of the shoulders and what movement there was in the spine, and increase particularly the movement in the spine and back through the rotation in the middle of the body. And then we release the hands for the main movement. Even though we are swinging across a little bit more here, we're not going right out here, because that happens. You see. So again, recognizing that point where you're about to begin straining, it's useful. There will be mistakes. You will go across and think, oh, a bit too tight, you need to go back. There's always trial and error in these things. But remember, the point at which you do start to stiffen up is the point at which that energy flow through your body begins to get affected in a negative way. Let's do one more on each side. And then we're going to go into stretching between heaven and earth. I'll explain why as we go along. But come back to the center now and turn your left hand palm up, your right hand palm down, just push out and then back. Keep your hands in front of your body, don't pull them behind. So you keep that broad quality in your back, and see if you can just feel that movement in your back. Hopefully doing bear play has helped to connect you to that energy, that movement. And then just see if you can also feel it working in the front part of the body. This is interestingly an exercise sometimes connected with the stomach in this region of the body. And that's partly because when we do it like this, there is actually an extension along the energy channel most directly associated with the stomach. Unsurprisingly referred to as the stomach meridian. So. And then building this in the usual way, and as always, only to a point that's comfortable for you, but transferring your weight across. So these sort of movements, where there is that little bit of opening up, a soft stretch, particularly when we feel it in the front of the body, are commonly associated with digestion in one form or another. I've seen it recommended that you do these sort of movements very gently after you've eaten. I've never actually tried that with this exercise, I must admit. Now, if you're comfortable, just bringing your foot in, step out. Remember, if you're stepping out a little bit wider, as I tend to, probably put the heel down first, have the foot slightly turned out. If you're more comfortable with a narrower stance, put the ball of the foot down and keep the legs straight. And then, again, if you wish, just raising the leg. Trying to do so without interfering with the alignment of your pelvis from left to right. See if you can notice which parts of your body are actually actively involved in movement and which parts of your body are actually involved in providing the stable structure for that movement. Both types, both functions must be done in a way that allows for the free flow of the movement. Okay, check out. Now, swimming dragon. So feet together or wider apart if that's easier for you. So in swimming dragon, we do get this sideways movement in the knees. Your knee's not like your elbow. Your elbow is a hinge joint and it works in one plane. Basically, when you can't sort of like force your elbow to move from side to side unless you've got a hypermobile joint, but that can bring its own problems. But your knee joint, whilst its principal range of movement is this hinge, it's not a proper what they call hinge joint. I'm not going to go into anatomy, but it's got a certain amount of sideways movement. I'm not entirely sure why it's evolved in that way. There's probably a good reason. I've never really thought about it. But this movement is very slight. You want to be able to do it because there are tendons, ligaments, and muscles that are involved in this, and you don't want them to atrophy, and you want them to be part of the movement. But you don't want to overdo it. So it's important again to realise that this is not an exercise where you would expect to be doing it under pressure, shall we say. This kind of movement with the knee can be quite damaging. And I suppose in part an exercise like this is there to help guard against that, to condition the muscles. But that kind of twisting of the knee is a very common sports injury. So whichever way you wish, tilting the pelvis from side to side. One of the interesting things about movements like this and rowing a boat in the middle of the lake is how we maintain ourselves without falling over. If I just do this, that happens. Now, this brings us back to this awareness of the center line of the body. Let me grab a stick and I'll demonstrate. I've done this with you a few times. So when I stand like this, I have a very clear center line. When I stand like this, I have that center line too. Now, put my hand there. I'm going to get my hands out of the way completely. Watch what happens. My shoulders go one way, my hips go the other. So there's a counterbalance there. And between the two, I maintain this central alignment. Oops, this is quite difficult to do. There you go, you can just about see it. So you still have that line because the two directions neutralize each other. And then your hands, so 3 circles, lower dantian, middle dantian around the chest, upper dantian around the head. Drop down as far as you can. If you can't reach all the way down, don't go all the way down. Coming up in between solar plexus and chest, in between your ribs, your chin, and over the top of your head. Very carefully. Listen to your back. You don't want lots of twisting around in the spine. This curve, if you look, is a very gentle one. So if I were to really exaggerate it, I wouldn't expect you to do that unless you're very sure of your back. Go nice and easy. What space is there for you to move in to? And if you do have a condition about sclerosis, there's osteoporosis there. If you have trouble with a disc, prolapsed disc, or even if you're just inclined to have backache, which is not uncommon, very carefully. It's good to get the movement there. It's good to get the energy flowing, to get the back mechanically working, but not good to overdo it. Change direction. And then shake it. So now, back to the wild goose for a couple of rounds. And then letting your hands drop all the way down, and as you push up, turning. So again, what I was saying about your knees is significant, but also, again, what do you notice in your back and spine? Once again, when we turn, our hands are slightly in front of the body. It's quite difficult to show this. Yeah, but yeah, there. You can see my hands aren't there, they're there. Little finger, shall we say, kind of in line with your ear, as a rule of thumb, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, and shake out. Now 1 foot forwards, transferring your weight. Another thing that can help is to get that sense of different parts of the body working together is through this image of resistance, water, or however you're envisioning it. Our bodies quite naturally change how they're moving when we do that. So once again, there's a certain movement, there's a certain energy in our back that builds on the energy, the all important energy, this transfer of the weight. It's a prime motivating energy in many of the movements. Raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. Good. And then on the other side. Raising your toes and your heel. And step in. And then taking a few steps in one direction or another, wherever you've got the space. And then going back. Now, what we have to be prepared to do is to take all these ideas and to work with them, and then to let them go. They're part of the learning process. But when we get to more complex exercises, we'll be doing wind blows to willows later. If you start thinking about them, it's not going to work. Again, to give an example, if you do drive, if you can think back to when you learned to drive and when you were told to change gear, changing gear is quite complex. You take your foot off the accelerator and you put it on the brake, and you put your foot on the, there's all sorts of things. There's about 6 stages or something like that. But if you do drive and you're going down the road and you suddenly start thinking about that and try to change in that way, you'll probably stall. So they need to become intuitive to us. That's just time and practice and understanding. I mean, there's things that I say that you don't understand, then you must ask about. But have your right foot forwards. So, bird folds its wings. And this is where we can begin to apply some kind of attention to the arms. This rotation of the arm, the big muscles of the arms there shouldn't be tight against the bones. They should be kind of not hanging loose, but a bit like the steel cables you see on some types of bridges and things like and things like that. A little bit of space around them. So I should be doing this. So our hands are probably the place where we most easily feel the responsiveness of the body in terms of creating a flow of movement. And yet at the same time, they retain this very still quality. They, if you like, receive the movement, they receive the energy. Now change into fisherman castanet. And then from this, move forward, but into wind blows the willows. What you want to feel eventually is that what's pushing your arms up and out is that movement between sinking down and push up. Even though you're not going up and down, you want to feel that as a dynamic flow within your body. Which it is, of course, because gravity is still pulling you down. And unless you've collapsed, there is still an upward movement. But we want to make sure that neither of those creates a strain. Remember, they should be harmonized. Raising your toes and your heel. And then stepping in. Good. Okay. On the other side. And then pushing and casting that. Wind blows the willows. Raising the toes and heel. Gradually feeling more of your weight settling in your supporting leg. Till you can just gently take the step. Good. And then you think that. Just stand for a moment and notice if you can think back to the start of the class. May not be obvious, but you know, if there are any changes that you can take note of. Keep your legs straight. So rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Onto one shoulder. Arm. Other side. Your back. Around your hips. Light on your belly. The upper part of your chest. Good and shake. Embracing tiger, return to the mountain. Whatever you've learnt today, you've already learnt. What you haven't learnt, there's little mileage in thinking, I must remember this, I must remember this, or I've got to remember that, because you'll just block everything else out. You can feel free to make notes in classes. I've done that at times, and if that helps you, or as I keep saying, you know, think, oh, he said something interesting there. I wonder if he'll say it again. Well, don't just wonder. Drop me an email and say, could you go over that again? I'm always happy to do that, but now is not the time for that. Now is the time to just let what you have absorbed properly settle. So sinking down, pushing up. What's happening in your body? What is it that's drawing you back to this center, to the mountain? And what is it that moves you out of that as well? Again, we have these two opposite movements, these two opposite energies, working as one, working in harmony. One more time. Lovely. The other thing about Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain is if we can get a sense of almost storage. The lower Dantian is a place where the energy is said to be stored. I sometimes think of it as a sense, not just the energy in that sense, but kind of when I'm seeking that sense of stillness, as we need so much during our daily lives. This becomes a kind of, in my mind, a kind of storage place for that as well. So maybe that's a useful image. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, cheers, Mike.
So, enjoy your day and see you soon. Bye-bye.
See you guys.